Happy birthday, my son. If only I could have helped you. Leaves from the vine, falling so slow, like fragile, tiny shells drifting in the foam. Little soldier boy, come marching home. Brave soldier boy comes marching home.
Boker Tov, Talmidim, Boker Tov, Chaverim. Welcome, my friends. Welcome, my students. We are here once again to learn about Soulful Psalms. And you've just watched a little clip from what I consider to be the greatest cartoon series ever. Now, I'm divided on this, I have to admit. Bugs Bunny is probably the greatest cartoon, though it's not really an extended narrative. Every episode is self-contained. Bugs Bunny teaches so many important lessons for us. But as far as a extended narrative, a long story for us to participate in episode to episode, I think the greatest cartoon is Avatar: The Last Airbender. Many of you have never heard of it, especially if you don't have children. I started watching it because of my children, and it really is magnificent. And it starts out seeming to be a children's program with an Asian flair to it. It's an adventure story. There are fantastic beasts. It's a fantastic world, but it becomes more sophisticated and more profound as it progresses, assuming that its viewer is getting older and becoming more capable of grasping subtle ideas. And that's exactly what happens. And it ends up being a wonderful, wonderful teaching on life and struggle and forgiveness. And I can't praise this series enough. Anyway, what you saw was one of my favorite characters, and I have a lot of favorite characters in the show, as would happen, but one of my favorite characters, Uncle Iroh. Now, Uncle Iroh is a very interesting character who goes through a character arc development. Initially, we are introduced to Iroh. He is a member of the royal family of the Fire Nation, which makes him closely associated with the villainous nation that is oppressing the other nations, air, water, and earth. And he is traveling in the company of his angry young nephew, who is seeking out to find, capture, and or kill the Avatar. So initially, we encounter him as a kind of calm advisor to an impulsive villain. But as time goes on, we discover that he has a great deal of depth behind him himself. He's a former general of the Fire Nation. He is known as the Dragon of the West. And he was in that role in his previous life before he decided to separate from this life and to journey with his nephew on his quest to capture the Airbender. What we quickly learn is that this is a man who has suffered a lot of losses, who has gained great wisdom, and in fact, he's trying to tutor and teach his nephew not to be a man of anger or vengeance, but to understand the world with more subtlety. Now, this particular scene is an important character development. It is an elegiac scene. That is, an elegy is a deep meditation on life and usually on death. And in this particular scene, we come to understand Iroh's backstory, that what has happened to him is that his son died in the wars of the Fire Nation. in fact, died in a battle that he was leading. And that has changed his perspective. And so he's honoring his son's memory by going out and having a picnic. He sings a little poem, and we understand the pathos of his own experience. Lovely. Gotta watch this show. Whenever you got some free time, I really encourage you to do that. So anyway, but this is about an elegy, something that a term that we use in the West, and visually, and actually in the poem, we hear something very important in Asian elegies, which is the falling of leaves. Now, if it were purely Japanese, it would probably be the falling of cherry blossoms. The falling of leaves represents, in the most specific context, death, but usually it also just stands in as a metaphor for the impermanence of existence or change. And so in this particular scene, we get leaves falling in our visual field, and we also get Iroh singing about falling leaves. So why am I telling you all of this? Because in our next psalm, Psalm 90, it is an elegy also, and it uses a metaphor also from the natural world. And I want you to connect that to what's going on here. Not necessarily the real world, but where I spend a great deal of my time, the cinematic world. All right, so let's go to Psalm 90. Now, Psalm 90 begins with the designation Sefer Revi'i, which means book 4. If I haven't explained this to you before, I want to tell you now that the Psalms are divvied up into 5 books in imitation of the 5 books of Moses. Whereas the 5 books of Moses serve as the spiritual constitution of the Jewish people, the Psalms have come to be perceived as the spiritual consolation of the Jewish people and of the individual Jew. These poems do not teach us laws, they do not necessarily instruct us in other ways, but rather they instruct us in the nature of life, and they teach us about permanence and impermanence, and that is at the heart of this particular poem. You will recognize this poem if you've been to a Jewish funeral, because parts of it, if not all of it, are used at virtually every Jewish funeral. So this rhetoric should not be unfamiliar to you, but I want to unpack it for you. So let's go. First of all, there's the superscription at the very beginning, a prayer of Moses, or a prayer to Moses, the man of God. That's really unusual too. We really don't have any other evidence besides these kinds of superscriptions that Moses ever wrote any Psalms. We don't think he did. It's probably more like dedicated to Moses. There are a number of them that will appear in the latter part of the book of Psalms, so probably composed later. Moses was an inspiration for this. All right, unless it's a Moses we don't know. Not going to get into it. All right, how do we begin? It should be familiar to many of you. O Lord, you have been our refuge in every generation. Before the mountains came into being, before you brought forth the earth and the world, from eternity to eternity, you are God. Ume olam ad olam, ata el. So it starts out by talking about the creation of the world, the primordial times before that, and God, you were there. You are the ultimate expression of permanence. You are eternal. And then it immediately shifts to the impermanence of the human experience, of what it is to be a human. So it continues on. You return man to dust. You decree, return, you mortals, for in your sight 1,000 years is like yesterday that has passed, like a watch in the night. You engulf men in sleep At daybreak, they are like grass that renews itself. At daybreak, it flourishes anew, but at dusk, it withers and dries up. So, if falling leaves is the Asian way of expressing human impermanence, the growth and failure of grass in the seasons represents the human experience from an Israelite point of view. All right. And so the contrast is there. So, and the point being made almost immediately is if you are overwhelmed by your own impermanence, grasp what is eternal, cling to the rock of Israel, who has been there since before the mountains. So we turn our eyes towards something that will sustain us as we experiences the successes and the losses of life. As we feel setbacks, as age besieges us, the world changes in ways we don't necessarily like, God is there. All right. It goes on to use rhetoric of a dark God. We are consumed by your anger, terror struck by your fury. You have set our iniquities before you. All our days pass away in your wrath. Pretty dark. The author here is probably feeling beset by his own life, and he feels like God is the source of that. We spend our years like a sigh. All right. The word used here could be sigh, whisper, but something of insignificance. It makes no impression. It's barely there. And then it goes on to another beautiful rhetorical phrase that we're probably familiar with. That is, the span of our life is 70 years, or given the strength, 80 years. But the best of them are trouble and sorrow. They pass by speedily, and we are in darkness. Who can know your furious anger? Your wrath matches the fear of you. So teach us. Again, we're hit on this theme of wrath. Not my favorite part, but I understand we feel beleaguered in phases of our life. Teach us to count our days, that we may attain a wise heart, or some translations, a heart of wisdom. There are a number of translation issues here. We're not completely confident of what the author originally intended. A scribe may have misspelled something and sent us on down a rabbit hole or something like that. But that is the essence of it, that we are impermanent, that you are eternal, and we try and draw wisdom from the impermanence that we experience. Help us to number our days, that we may attain a heart of wisdom. This is truly an elegy. All right. And then it goes on with the image of turn. Turn, O Lord, how long? Show your mercy to your servants. Satisfy us at daybreak with your steadfast love, that we may sing for joy all our days. Give us joy for as long as you have afflicted us. Let your deeds be seen by your servants, your glory by their children. May the favor of the Lord our God be upon us. Let the work of our hands prosper. Or I rather like the older translation. I think it's based on the King James, but I'm not completely. Establish the work of our hands, that it may long endure. I love that phrase, and I use it frequently at funerals. Oh, prosper the work of our hands. And that ends the psalm. So clearly, the author in this stage of their life feels affliction. They assume that it flows from God, because all things flow from God from their perspective. I think we, with the perspective of science and other things, know just that we're talking about entropy. Things break down, things fall apart, energy is lost and not recovered. That is the impermanence. That's the falling leaves, the cherry blossoms that will not stay forever on the tree. And that's the point of this psalm, is to help us acknowledge the impermanence of life, but also to recognize that there is something out there that is more permanent, that is enduring. And we hope to participate a little bit in that enduring capacity, that the things we do, if we ourselves will not endure, met our deeds, our actions, our best intentions endure, establish the work of our hands, that they may long endure. That's it for me today. A great psalm, and I hope that you take a little time to watch The Last Airbender. It's so worth it. You know, uh, I just have to pitch in here. Cartoons are not for children. Cartoons draw children, but there are so many cartoons that speak to adult experience. If you want, I'll make a list for you, and we should watch them because they really do offer us great teachings. Take care until next time.